Humanity, in one of the oldest stories ever written down, was not born from kindness alone. We were made, shaped with intent, pressed from clay, mixed with something divine, and standing close to that strange beginning was Enki, god of wisdom, deep water, magic, craft, and quiet rebellion. Not the distant ruler of a perfect heaven, but a calculating presence beneath the world, where fresh water moved unseen. In Mesopotamian imagination, the first humans did not simply receive life. They were designed for a purpose, and Enki knew exactly what that purpose would cost. So we begin not with a garden, or a paradise, or a clean burst of light. We begin lower down, in the wet foundations of the first cities, where myth and mud were never very far apart. Long before empires carved their victories into stone, southern Mesopotamia was a place of rivers, marshes, canals, and fragile abundance. Civilization depended on water that could nourish one season and destroy the next. It is no accident that a god like Enki emerged from such a world. Brilliant, fluid, generous, dangerous. He was the mind beneath the surface, the hidden current behind survival. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe, so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. And as we begin, leave a comment letting us know where in the world you are watching from tonight. It's a reminder of how far these forgotten echoes can reach. Because the mystery of Enki is not only that he helped create humankind, it is that, again and again, when divine order turned against the noisy, vulnerable creatures it had made, Enki chose them. Quietly, cleverly, sometimes against the rules. And that choice still ripples beneath the oldest stories we have. Chapter 2. Before Enki had a name, before Enki became a figure in myth, before scribes pressed his name into wet clay, there was the land that made him imaginable. Southern Mesopotamia was not a gentle place to begin a civilization. It offered no easy paradise waiting to be inherited. It was flat, low, and restless. A world shaped by the Tigris and Euphrates as they moved toward the Gulf, spreading into marshes, reed beds, mud flats, and fields that could become fertile only through careful human effort. To live there was to negotiate with water every day. Too little, and crops failed. Too much, and the same life-giving river could erase boundaries, drown fields, and turn human order back into wilderness. This matters because the gods of ancient Sumer were not invented in empty space. They grew from an environment where survival depended on forces that were visible and invisible at the same time. A canal might look like a simple trench in the earth, but it represented planning, labor, authority, timing, and trust. A temple might rise above the settlement, but its power depended on water moving correctly through the landscape below. The first cities were not only built with mud brick, they were built with management. And in such a world, wisdom was not a private virtue. It was infrastructure. To us, wisdom can sound abstract, like something spoken in proverbs or written in books. In early Sumer, wisdom meant knowing when to open a sluice, how to read the behavior of a river, where to dig, how to measure a field, how to purify, how to build, how to keep a community from collapsing under its own needs. It meant technical skill and sacred knowledge braided together so tightly that separating them would have made little sense. That is the world out of which Enki slowly emerges. He is not simply a water god in the narrow sense, as if he presided over rivers the way another deity might preside over storms. His connection is deeper and stranger. Enki belongs to the hidden water, the fresh water beneath the earth, the unseen source imagined below fields, cities, and temples. Long before later traditions would turn him into Ea, the wise god of Babylonian and Akkadian texts, his Sumerian identity was tied to the southern landscape, especially to the ancient city of Eridu. Eridu was remembered by Mesopotamian tradition as one of the oldest cities, and in mythic memory, it carried an aura of beginnings. It was not the largest or most politically dominant city for all time, but it held a religious importance that outlived ordinary power. There, Enki's temple was associated with the Abzu, the deep freshwater realm that gave his mythology its center of gravity. Whether every detail of later tradition reflects early reality is harder to prove. Myth has a habit of making old places older, and sacred places more central than they may have been in every period. But what we can say with more confidence is that Enki's identity was inseparable from the idea of depth. Depth of water, depth of knowledge, depth of origin. That depth is important. The most obvious gods are often sky gods, storm gods, sun gods, powers you can look up and see. Enki is different. His power is not announced by thunder. It gathers underneath. It is present before it is visible. It feeds the field from below, fills the well, cleanses the body, and gives life to the city without standing in the center of the sky, demanding attention. There is something very Mesopotamian about that. The early cities of Sumer did not float above nature. They were embedded in it, exposed to it, dependent on it. A city required walls, storehouses, workers, priests, rulers, scribes, and fields. But without canals, the whole machine faltered. Water had to be brought, divided, controlled, and ritually understood. It was practical work, but it also carried religious meaning. The boundary between engineering and devotion was thin. To dig a canal was to rearrange the conditions of life. To maintain one was to preserve a fragile agreement between gods, people, and land. So when ancient people imagined a deity of wisdom and water, they were not making a decorative symbol. They were naming the hidden intelligence that allowed civilization to exist at all. This is one of the reasons Enki feels so different from a simple creator figure. He does not only create by command. He organizes. He advises. He solves. He cleanses. He equips. He understands systems. In later myths, that intelligence can become slippery, even dangerous, because a mind that understands the rules can also find the loopholes. But at the beginning, before the more complicated stories gather around him, Enki's nature seems to rise from a basic human recognition. Life depends on what moves beneath the surface. Think of the first settlements in that southern plain. Mud brick houses warming under the sun, reed boats pushing through channels, workers repairing banks after a flood, priests maintaining offerings, scribes learning to mark accounts, rations, fields, and names. The world was becoming organized, but never fully safe. Every sign of order had to be defended against decay. Mud brick returned to mud. Canals silted up, fields turned salty. Political authority shifted. Human plans were always temporary. A god like Enki belongs to that tension. He is not the god of a finished world. He is the god of a world that must be continually made livable. This may be why he often appears as a helper in myth, but never as a harmless one. Help, in Mesopotamian stories, rarely comes without cost. Knowledge can rescue, but it can also disturb. Water can fertilize, but it can also dissolve. A creator can love his creation and still have created it for labor. Enki's earliest atmosphere is already double-sided because the landscape itself was double-sided. The marshes of southern Mesopotamia help explain this. They were rich with birds, fish, reeds, and movement, but also difficult to define. Marshland resists clean boundaries. It is neither fully land nor fully water. It hides pathways, nourishes life, and confuses outsiders. In a symbolic sense, Enki carries something of that quality. He is a boundary figure. He stands between earth and water, gods and humans, order and improvisation. Later myths will make that role explicit, but the pattern is already there in the geography. What people often misunderstand about ancient gods is that they were not merely characters in stories. They were ways of thinking about reality. Enki was not just a personality with myths attached. He was a solution to a problem. How do you explain the intelligence built into civilization? The fertility hidden under the ground? The strange fact that human survival depends on knowledge no single person fully owns? To call that power Enki was to give it a face, and that face was never entirely straightforward. Even his wisdom had a watery quality. It moved around obstacles. It took the shape of the vessel that held it. It could be clear, cleansing, and generous, or it could be deep enough to conceal motives. This is why, as his myths develop, Enki becomes one of the most psychologically interesting gods in Mesopotamian religion. He is not only mighty, he is strategic. He does not always confront divine authority directly. Sometimes he lets the current do its work quietly. But before the rebellions, before the flood warning, before the creation of humankind from clay and divine substance, there was this older layer, a land where people learned that survival came from what lay below. The first cities did not rise because the world was easy. They rose because human beings became disciplined enough, desperate enough, and imaginative enough to cooperate with an unstable environment. Enki belongs to that achievement. He is the divine memory of water controlled, but never conquered, knowledge used, but never fully possessed. And so, before Enki had a name, there was the hidden source, the fresh water under the earth, the canal cut through mud, the temple standing over a fragile settlement, the sense that wisdom did not descend only from the heavens, but rose from below, from the deep places where life begins before anyone sees it. Chapter 3. Lord of the Abzu. Beneath the earth, in the Mesopotamian imagination, there was water. Not the river water that could be seen glittering under the sun. Not the flood water that rose across fields and left farmers staring at ruined boundaries. This was deeper water, older water, fresh water hidden below the world. The Sumerians called it the Abzu. To understand Enki, we have to linger there for a while. The Abzu was not simply an underground lake, at least not in the modern geological sense. It was a sacred idea as much as a place, the deep source from which fertility, purification, and life itself could emerge. It was imagined beneath the surface of the earth, beneath cities and temples, beneath the ordinary world of labor. It was unseen, yet everything depended on it. Everything. In a land where fresh water meant survival, the thought that there was a secret reservoir under creation gave the world a hidden architecture. Enki was its lord. That title may sound ceremonial, but it tells us almost everything. Enki's authority does not begin with conquest. It begins with access. He knows where life comes from before it appears. He dwells at the source before the field turns green, before the canal fills, before the ritual water touches the body. His power is not merely to command life, but to understand the concealed conditions that make life possible. This is why Enki's wisdom feels different from the wisdom of a distant judge. It is intimate. It is technical. It is wet-handed. It belongs to wells, cleansing rites, skilled labor, and the mysterious relationship between hidden things and visible outcomes. A seed becomes a plant because something beneath the surface answers it. A city survives because water is guided to the right place at the right time. A person is purified because water carries away what must not remain. In each case, the surface event depends on an unseen depth. The Abzu gave that depth a name. In Enki's sanctuary at Eridu, the connection between God, temple, and deep water became especially powerful. Later Mesopotamian tradition remembered Eridu as a place of beginnings, and Enki's temple there was associated with the Abzu in a way that made architecture feel cosmic. A temple was not just a building raised by human hands. It could become a symbolic meeting point between the inhabited world and the hidden waters below it. That idea changes how we read these myths. It is tempting to imagine ancient religion as a collection of stories floating above ordinary life. But in Sumer, sacred geography was often anchored in practical dependence. Water was not a metaphor first. It was survival first. Only after that could it become symbol, ritual, and theology. The Abzu mattered because everyone knew, in the body, what water meant. Thirst was not philosophical. Failed irrigation was not poetic. Salty soil, broken canals, and dry fields were immediate realities. So when myth placed Enki in command of the deep fresh water, it was not making him decorative. It was placing him at the foundation of civilization, and yet, the Abzu was never just comforting. Hidden sources can nourish, but they can also unsettle. What lies beneath the world is powerful partly because it is not fully visible. You can benefit from it without mastering it. You can build a shrine above it, name its lord, and pour offerings, but the depth remains depth. It resists being emptied into simple explanation. That resistance is part of Enki's character. He is generous, but not transparent. He is wise, but not always direct. He gives, protects, arranges, and rescues, yet he often does so in ways that suggest he knows more than he says. The Abzu is the perfect home for such a god. It is life-giving and secretive at once. It makes abundance possible, but it does not expose all its workings. There is a quiet danger in that kind of wisdom. A storm god may frighten you because his power is loud. A war god may frighten you because his power is violent. Enki's power is subtler. He frightens when he frightens, because he understands the system from underneath. He knows the channels. He knows the hidden pressure points. He knows how divine decisions touch human lives, and how a small alteration in the unseen order can change everything above. This is why the Abzu should not be reduced to scenery. It is a key to the moral complexity of Enki's mythology. If he is lord of the hidden source, then he is also lord of the hidden consequence. He understands that creation is not only a moment of making, it is a chain of dependencies. To create humans, as later myths will describe, is not simply to animate clay. It is to establish labor, hunger, ritual obligation, population, noise, mortality, and need. A less complicated god might see only the command. Enki sees the mechanism, and perhaps that is why he so often becomes the one who intervenes. In Mesopotamian thought, the universe was not usually imagined as gentle or sentimental. The gods had hierarchy. They had demands. They could be irritated, hungry, political, and severe. Humanity existed in relation to divine need, not outside it. In that kind of world, wisdom was not soft. It was the skill of survival inside a structure that could crush you. The Lord of the Abzu knows structure. He knows what supports the visible order. He knows that the grandeur of heaven and the power of the great gods still depend, in some symbolic sense, on what rises from below. This gives Enki a strange position in the divine world. He is not always the king. He is not always the loudest, but he is indispensable. Remove the hidden waters, and the ordered world begins to fail. Remove the secret knowledge, and civilization becomes muscle without memory. One of the most revealing things about Enki is that his sacred domain is not high above human reach. It is beneath people's feet. This does not make him less divine. It makes his divinity closer to the conditions of life. The Abzu is not remote like a star. It is hidden in the place where foundations go. A city may rise proudly, with walls and gates and temples, but Enki's realm suggests that pride rests on something older, darker, and more fluid than brick. There is a lesson in that, and it may be one reason these stories still feel alive. Ancient Mesopotamian myth often refuses to give us a clean separation between blessing and burden. The same water that sustains the field can flood it. The same knowledge that builds civilization can introduce conflict. The same God who protects humanity may also be involved in the conditions that bind humanity to work. The Abzu holds this ambiguity beautifully. It is the source of life, but it is not innocent. It is sacred, but it is not simple. To call Enki the Lord of the Abzu is therefore to say that he governs more than water. He governs beginnings that are hidden, gifts that arrive with obligations, wisdom that can save or disturb, and life that rises from depths no one fully controls. When later myths show him helping to shape humanity, warning a flood survivor, or losing the divine powers of civilization to Inanna after a drunken exchange, we should remember where he comes from. He comes from below, from the place of concealed abundance, from the fresh water under the earth, from the idea that the world is kept alive by forces most people only notice when they fail. That may be the most haunting part of Enki's sacred domain. The Abzu is everywhere beneath the story, but rarely on display. It does not need to dominate the sky. It does not need thunder. It waits under the city, under the field, under the myth itself, quietly feeding the world above. And in that deep, hidden water, Enki becomes more than a god of creation. He becomes the keeper of the secret that creation depends on what it cannot see. Chapter 4. The God of Wisdom and Dangerous Knowledge. Wisdom, in Enki's world, was never just the ability to think beautifully. It was the ability to make things work. That distinction matters, because modern readers often imagine a God of wisdom as a calm philosopher seated above the confusion of life, offering polished truths to anyone patient enough to listen. Enki is not that kind of figure. His wisdom is less like a lecture and more like a toolkit. It belongs to purification bowls, ritual formulas, canal systems, brick molds, healing acts, skilled hands, and decisions made under pressure. It is the intelligence of a civilization trying to survive in a landscape that does not forgive laziness. In Mesopotamian mythology, knowledge is powerful because it does something. It separates clean from unclean. It organizes labor. It gives shape to cities. It teaches the craftsperson how to transform raw material into useful form. It tells the ritual specialist which words must be spoken, which substances must be used, and which boundary has been crossed. Knowledge is not decoration, it is leverage, and Enki holds a great deal of it. This is why he can appear so generous and so unsettling at the same time. A god who knows how the world is assembled also knows how it may be altered. He understands the visible order, but also the hidden instructions underneath it. If the cosmos has rules, Enki is the one who has read the manual, noticed the missing pages, and quietly discovered where the hinges are. That kind of wisdom is not always welcome. For the higher gods, especially those concerned with order, hierarchy, and command, Enki's intelligence can be useful right up until it becomes inconvenient. He is often the problem solver of the divine world, the one capable of designing a way out of crisis. But a mind trained to solve crises does not always remain obedient to the original plan. Enki can preserve order by bending it. He can obey a command in a way that changes its meaning. He can protect life without making a public rebellion out of it. This is one of the reasons he is so compelling. He does not usually overturn the table. He adjusts the weight beneath one leg until everything slides. The ancient imagination understood something here that still feels sharp. Knowledge is never morally neutral once it enters the world. A craft can build a temple, a weapon, a boat, or a prison. A purification rite can restore a person to community, but it can also mark someone as having been outside it. Magic can heal, defend, reveal, or manipulate. The same cleverness that saves humanity from destruction may also help create humanity for labor in the first place. Enki's wisdom lives inside that contradiction. He is linked with magic, but not in the modern sense of stage illusion or fantasy spectacle. Mesopotamian magic was a serious technology of relationship between humans and gods, illness and cure, impurity and cleansing, danger and protection. Words, substances, gestures, and divine names mattered because the universe was imagined as responsive to properly handled sacred knowledge. To know the right formula was not merely to recite a poem. It was to participate in the maintenance of order. Here, Enki's connection to purification becomes especially important. Water cleans because water moves between states. It touches the body and then leaves it. It carries away what should not remain. In a land where fresh water was precious, ritual cleansing was not an empty symbol. It drew on a physical truth everyone understood. Enki, as lord of the hidden fresh water, becomes the divine authority behind cleansing, renewal, and the restoration of boundaries. But purification also reveals the darker edge of wisdom. To purify something, one must first recognize contamination. To restore order, one must know disorder intimately. The healer knows disease. The exorcist knows the presence to be expelled. The builder knows collapse. The wise god, then, is not innocent. Enki's intelligence includes knowledge of what can go wrong. That may be why he is so often placed near the beginning of complicated events. He is not merely called when everything is peaceful. He appears when divine labor has become intolerable, when humanity must be fashioned, when a flood threatens the created world, when the powers of civilization pass into new hands. Enki belongs to turning points. His wisdom enters the story when the existing order has developed a crack. And once he enters, the outcome rarely remains simple. In myths surrounding civilization, Enki is associated with the arts and powers that make ordered life possible. These are not only pleasant gifts. Civilization includes music, craft, writing, kingship, sexuality, law, conflict, lamentation, and the arrangements that bind communities together. Ancient Mesopotamian thought did not treat culture as a purely human invention. The powers that structured society were imagined as divine forces, carefully held and transmitted. To possess them was to possess the grammar of civilized life. This is a very different way of thinking from the modern habit of dividing the sacred from the practical. For the Mesopotamians, weaving, building, purification, governance, and ritual could all belong to the same sacred economy. A city was not just a crowd of people and houses. It was an organized reality, and organization itself required divine authorization. Enki's role in that world is therefore architectural, even when he is not holding a brick. He is one of the minds behind structure. He gives shape to possibility. He makes the raw world usable. Still, the stories do not allow us to make him a simple benefactor. The more knowledge a god possesses, the more dangerous his generosity becomes. When Enki gives, what exactly is being given? Help, certainly, but also dependence. If civilization's powers come from the gods, then human life remains tied to divine custody. If rituals cleanse, they also remind people that impurity is always near. If crafts build cities, cities also create labor, hierarchy, noise, and conflict. Enki's gifts do not free humanity from the divine order. They make humanity better equipped to live inside it. That is a subtle but important point. A modern version of the story might turn Enki into a rebel liberator, a god who steals fire for humankind and breaks the chains of heaven. But the Mesopotamian picture is more restrained and, in some ways, more honest. Enki protects humans, but he does not remove them from the system that uses them. He softens disaster, but he does not abolish mortality. He shares knowledge but not complete independence. His mercy is real, yet it operates within a universe where the gods still remain gods. This makes his character feel unusually mature. Enki's myths are not simple fantasies of rescue. They are meditations on compromise. Life continues because someone clever finds a way through impossible conditions. Survival is not purity, it is negotiation. And negotiation requires intelligence of a particular kind, not brute force, not perfect obedience, not open defiance every time authority becomes cruel. Enki's intelligence is adaptive. It listens for the weakness in a command. It searches for an indirect route. It understands that a law can be honored in wording while quietly altered in effect. In another figure, this might look like cowardice. In Enki, it becomes a sacred form of strategy. There is a reason such a god would matter to people living in early cities. City life itself depends on negotiated order. Farmers, priests, rulers, merchants, laborers, and scribes all move within systems of obligation. Too much rigidity and the system breaks. Too much chaos and it dissolves. Enki's wisdom occupies the narrow passage between them. That passage is dangerous because it depends on judgment. The same flexibility that saves can corrupt. The same cleverness that protects the vulnerable can also shield the powerful. Ancient stories do not always pause to moralize this in modern terms. but the tension is there. Enki's mind is a gift, and gifts from the deep are rarely uncomplicated. To call him the god of wisdom, then, is not to place him in a quiet library of eternal truths. It is to place him in the workshop, the canal bank, the ritual chamber, the council of gods, and the crisis before dawn when someone must decide how much of the rule can be bent without breaking the world. His knowledge is practical because life is practical. It is mysterious because its sources are hidden. And it is disruptive because anyone who truly understands order also understands that order is not the same thing as justice. That is the unease at the center of Enki. He knows too much to be merely obedient. He cares too much to be merely neutral. And when the gods draw their lines, Enki is often already looking beneath them, listening for the water that has found another way through. Chapter 5. The Divine Order Before Humanity. Before humans entered the story, the Mesopotamian gods were not floating in perfect stillness, surrounded by effortless light. They were alive in a much stranger way. They ate. They desired. They argued. They ranked one another. They made decisions in councils, imposed labor, guarded privileges, and expected the universe to function according to divine command. Their world was sacred, but it was not serene. It had structure. It had pressure. It had work. That is one of the first shocks of Mesopotamian creation tradition. The gods are powerful, but they are not beyond need. They require food, drink, houses, service, offerings, and order. They are not imagined as distant abstractions who create out of overflowing love and then withdraw into perfection. They are closer to rulers, landowners, judges, engineers, and exhausted administrators. Divine life, in these stories, has an economy, and economies create tension. At the top are the great gods, the commanding powers whose authority shapes heaven, earth, and the world below. Beneath them are lesser divine beings, often imagined as carrying out the heavy work required to maintain existence. The cosmos does not run automatically. It must be dug, watered, supplied, and sustained. Even before humans appear, the Mesopotamian universe is already a place where someone must carry the burden. That detail changes everything. In many later traditions, humanity's origin is framed around innocence, disobedience, moral testing, or a fall from some original nearness to the divine. But in the Mesopotamian imagination, especially in the traditions that lead toward atrahasis, the problem begins among the gods themselves. Human beings are created not because the world is empty, but because the divine order is strained. The need for humanity grows out of a crisis in labor. It is a remarkably unsentimental beginning. There is no need to make the story harsher than it is. The ancient texts are already stark enough. They imagine a time when the lesser gods grew tired of their work, when the maintenance of the world became unbearable, when hierarchy produced resentment. The details vary across traditions, and we should be careful not to flatten every Mesopotamian myth into a single neat system. But the recurring idea is clear. Before humanity was fashioned, divine society had a labor problem, and that problem is deeply revealing. It tells us that ancient Mesopotamian people did not imagine work as a small side effect of existence. Work was central. Irrigation, agriculture, temple service, building, carrying, grinding, accounting, storing, repairing. These were not background tasks. They were the conditions of life. So when people told stories about the gods before humans, they imagined even the divine world through the lens of organized labor. Someone had to dig the canals, someone had to feed the system, someone had to keep order from collapsing into mud, hunger, and complaint. The gods, in other words, looked down on humanity from above, but the stories looked up at the gods from a very human world. This is not a failure of imagination. It is a profound clue. Myth often reveals what a society considered unavoidable. For Sumer and later Mesopotamia, labor was not merely punishment. It was the engine of civilization. Fields did not irrigate themselves. Temples did not fill their storerooms by miracle. Cities did not remain cities without hands constantly repairing what time and water damaged. Life required service. So the divine order before humanity mirrors the city. There is command from above. There is work below. There are rations, obligations, status, and resentment. The gods may be immortal, but their society is not free from politics. Their hierarchy is not a peaceful painting. It is a working arrangement. And like all working arrangements, it produces friction. Enki's place in this world is especially important because he is not simply another powerful figure enjoying the benefits of divine order. He is one of the gods capable of understanding the machinery behind it. He sees systems. He knows what happens when pressure builds in the hidden places. And when the labor crisis becomes impossible to ignore, his kind of wisdom becomes necessary. This is where Enki begins to stand between divine authority and the beings who do not yet exist. The great gods need a solution. The lesser gods need relief. The cosmic order needs to continue. But the solution will not be gentle. It will involve the making of a new creature, one capable of carrying the load that has become intolerable for the gods. Humanity, in this vision, enters the universe as an answer to divine exhaustion. There is something almost bureaucratic about it, and that is part of its power. Creation is not presented as a romantic gesture. It is a decision made under pressure. It is practical, brilliant, and morally uneasy. The gods require service, so a servant species is designed. Yet because Enki is involved, the result will not remain a simple instrument. Humans will be made from earthly matter, but also touched by something divine. They will be fragile, noisy, mortal, and useful. They will also be strangely more than what the gods intended. That complication is already waiting inside the divine order before humanity appears. A strict hierarchy wants function. It wants each being to remain in its assigned place. But creation has a way of exceeding administration. Once life is formed, it has its own momentum. A tool that suffers is no longer just a tool. A worker who sings, mourns, dreams, builds, remembers, and fears death becomes something harder to categorize. The divine council may imagine a solution to labor, but Enki's world always leaves room for unintended depth. This is why the story is haunting rather than merely cynical. It would be easy to say that Mesopotamian myth portrays humans as slaves of the gods and stop there. There is truth in that reading, but it is incomplete. The myths do show humanity created to serve divine needs. They do place humans in a world of obligation. Yet they also show a god like Enki becoming attached to the survival of these creatures. They show divine plans bending around human vulnerability. They suggest that once humanity exists, the moral landscape changes. Before that can happen, though, the divine world must first reveal its own instability. The gods are mighty, but not self-sufficient. They command, but they depend. They demand offerings, yet the need for offerings implies a relationship. They stand above humanity, yet in creating humanity, they bind themselves to the very creatures they will later judge, punish, and protect. This is one of the great ironies of the Mesopotamian imagination. Humans are made to relieve the gods, but once made, they become impossible to ignore. And perhaps that is why Enki matters so much. A god of hidden waters understands dependency. He knows that what appears powerful on the surface may rest on something unseen below. Divine authority itself depends on labor, food, ritual, and continuity. The high gods may sit in council, but the order they defend requires foundations. Enki belongs to those foundations. He knows that systems survive only when the burdens placed upon them do not become unbearable. Before humans, then, the universe is not empty. It is crowded with divine need. It is a world waiting for a replacement worker, a ritual servant, a new kind of being pressed into existence by the demands of heaven. But it is also a world waiting for a mistake, or perhaps a miracle. The moment when a solution becomes a species, when labor becomes consciousness, when clay becomes someone who can look back at the gods and wonder why they were made. Chapter 6. When the gods grew tired. The crisis begins, strangely enough, with fatigue. Not human fatigue. Not the aching back of a farmer bent over a field, or the cracked hands of someone clearing silt from a canal. In the Mesopotamian imagination, the first exhaustion belonged to the gods themselves. In traditions like Atrahasis, the world before humanity is not calm. It is running on divine labor. Lesser gods bear the burden of work that keeps the ordered world alive. They dig, carry, maintain, and endure. The cosmos has already been arranged into hierarchy, and hierarchy has produced something painfully familiar. Those at the bottom are tired. That detail gives the myth its unsettling force. The gods do not create humans because creation is beautiful. They create humans because the system is failing. The lower gods have reached the edge of obedience. Their labor is no longer simply difficult. It has become intolerable. In some versions of the tradition, their unrest grows into open revolt. The work gangs of the divine world rise against the structure that has consumed them. They are not rebels in a modern political manifesto, exactly, but they are not passive either. They make divine order tremble by refusing the burden assigned to them. This is one of the oldest labor crises preserved in myth, and it is worth pausing over that, because it tells us something sharp about the people who told these stories. Ancient Mesopotamia was a world of organized work. Cities depended on irrigation, agriculture, temple economies, storage systems, accounting, and seasonal labor. To maintain life, people had to coordinate effort on a scale far larger than any single household. The canal was not only a line of water, it was a line of obligation. So when myth imagined the gods growing tired, it was not a childish projection. It was a recognition that order always has a cost. Someone carries it. The divine world, in this story, discovers that even sacred hierarchy cannot escape pressure from below. Command may assign labor, but command cannot make exhaustion disappear. At some point, burden becomes protest. The gods who were meant to maintain the system become the threat to it. And suddenly, the high gods face a problem that cannot be solved by simply ordering everyone to behave. This is where the story becomes darker than many creation myths. Humanity is not introduced as the beloved center of existence. Humanity is proposed as a replacement. The work must continue, The gods must be fed. The fields of the cosmos must be maintained. The burden must move somewhere. If the lesser gods will no longer bear it, another being must be fashioned to take their place. That being is us. There is no need to turn this into pure despair, but there is also no need to soften it too much. In this tradition, the origin of humankind begins in exhaustion, conflict, and administrative necessity. We are not imagined first as kings of nature. We are imagined as workers in a sacred economy. Human life begins as a solution to divine inconvenience. And yet, the myth is not crude. A lesser story would stop at exploitation. It would say, the gods were lazy, so they made humans to suffer. But the Mesopotamian version is more complicated. The gods themselves are not all the same. Their society has divisions. Their needs conflict. Their power is real, but not always orderly. The revolt of the lower gods exposes weakness inside heaven. It shows that divine order is not a flawless machine. It is a negotiated structure. And negotiation begins when force is no longer enough. Enki's importance grows from this pressure. He is not merely a witness to the crisis. His kind of intelligence is exactly what such a moment requires. When a system breaks, the answer cannot come from authority alone. It needs design. It needs adaptation. It needs someone who understands how to transform a problem into a new arrangement. Enki is the god suited to that uncomfortable task. But this is also where his image becomes morally difficult. If Enki helps create humanity to relieve the gods, then he is involved in the origin of human burden. He is not simply the friend of humankind standing outside the machinery of exploitation. He is one of its architects. Later, he may protect humans. He may warn them. He may preserve them when other gods decide they have become too numerous, too loud, too troublesome. But the first problem he helps solve is not human suffering. It is divine exhaustion. That contradiction gives Enki his depth. A purely benevolent creator would be easier to admire. A purely cruel one would be easier to condemn. Enki is harder to hold still. He belongs to the hidden places where necessity and mercy mix. He helps design a species made for service. But once that species exists, he seems unwilling to let it be erased. He participates in a world that uses humans, yet repeatedly acts as if human survival matters. This is not inconsistency in the weak sense. It is the myth thinking honestly about power. Creation here is not innocent. It transfers pain. The burden that crushes one class of divine beings is moved onto a new kind of creature made from earth and divine substance. In that sense, humanity is born inside a compromise. The gods are relieved, but humans inherit toil. Order is restored, but only because labor has been relocated. Still, something unexpected happens when labor receives a human face. The gods may intend workers, but the myths know that workers are not empty tools. They eat, sleep, fear, multiply, sing, mourn, and call out. They become communities. They become cities. They become the very beings who maintain the temples where the gods receive offerings. Once humanity appears, divine need becomes relationship. The gods have created servants, but they have also created dependence. That is the quiet trap hidden inside the solution. The divine order wants humans to carry burdens, yet it cannot remain untouched by them. Human beings become necessary. Without them, offerings cease. temples fall silent. The system loses the very labor and ritual attention it needed. The creature made to solve a problem becomes the foundation of a new problem. What happens when the servants are vulnerable, noisy, and impossible to fully control? The revolt of the lower gods, therefore, does more than explain why humans were made. It explains why humans matter. We matter because the universe, as imagined in these myths, is not self-sustaining without us. That is not the same as modern humanism. It is not a declaration of human dignity in the way we might prefer, but it is still remarkable. Humanity is low, mortal, and burdened, yet indispensable. And Enki seems to understand this before others do. Perhaps because he is a god of foundations, he recognizes that what is placed below cannot simply be despised. The worker, the canal, the hidden water, the clay body, these are not glamorous, but the world rests on them. Divine authority may sit above, but survival moves underneath. Enki's sympathy for humans may come from that deeper logic. He knows what hidden things are worth. So when the gods grew tired, the story did not move toward peace. It moved toward invention. A new creature would be shaped from the materials of the earth. A new burden-bearer would enter the divine economy. The unrest in heaven would be quieted, at least for a time. But the solution would carry a mystery inside it. If humans were made to work for the gods, why would a god later risk so much to save them? The answer begins in clay. Chapter 7. Blood, clay, and the first humans. The first human being, in the Mesopotamian imagination, was not made from light, not from breath alone, not from a clean word spoken across emptiness. The body began with clay. That detail is easy to pass over because clay appears in many ancient creation stories, and after a while it can sound almost familiar. But in Mesopotamia, clay was not an ornamental symbol. It was the material of daily existence. Houses were built from it. Tablets were written on it. Bricks were shaped from it and left to dry under the sun. Clay held accounts, laws, hymns, contracts, recipes, myths, and the names of the dead. It was soft enough to receive an impression, and hard enough, once fired or dried, to carry memory across centuries. So when a myth says humans were made from clay, it is saying something precise. Humanity comes from the same substance as the city. We are earth made useful, shaped by hands, marked by purpose, fragile when wet, breakable when dry, and yet capable of preserving the thoughts of gods and kings long after their temples have fallen. But clay alone was not enough. In traditions such as Atrahasis, the making of humankind requires something more disturbing, a divine element, often associated with the flesh and blood of a slain god. The exact names and details can shift across versions, and we should resist pretending the tradition gives us one perfectly tidy account. But the central image remains powerful. Humanity is formed from earth mixed with divine substance. The result is neither purely animal nor fully divine. It is a hybrid creature, low in status, but strangely charged with heaven's remains. This is the moment where the story becomes haunting. The gods want relief from labor. The lesser gods have rebelled against the endless burden placed upon them. The divine order needs a replacement worker. Enki, with his deep intelligence, helps guide the solution. A mother goddess, known in different traditions by names such as Nintu or Mami, is involved in the actual fashioning and birth of the new beings. Creation is not the act of one isolated figure. It is a divine procedure, almost ritual in its seriousness, and morally uncomfortable from the beginning. A god must die so humans can live. That is not a small detail. It means human existence begins with violence already inside it. Not violence in the sense of a battlefield described for spectacle, but a sacred killing that becomes part of human identity. The blood of a god gives the clay something it did not have before: animation, awareness, perhaps a kind of restless memory. Humans are made to take over labor, but they carry within them a trace of the very divine world that exploits them. This is one of the great contradictions of the myth. Human beings are created as servants, yet they are not made as empty tools. They contain something of the gods. That inner divine remnant does not make them equal to the gods, and the myth never suggests a modern idea of human freedom. But it complicates the hierarchy. A creature shaped for work now possesses a strange depth. The worker has a soul-like inheritance, a troubling connection to the heavens, a reason to be more than mud with hands. This may explain why humanity becomes so difficult for the gods to manage. A simple tool does not multiply into cities. A simple tool does not complain, sing, pray, make offerings, disturb sleep, tell stories about its own origin, or fear the flood. But humans do. They are designed for labor, then immediately exceed the design. The clay body obeys the ground. The divine mixture refuses to be only ground. Inside the myth, human nature is already divided, and that division feels very old because it is still recognizable. We are heavy and luminous at once. We hunger, sweat, age, and break. Yet we also imagine, build, remember, and ask questions the body alone does not need answered. The Mesopotamian story does not explain this through modern philosophy. It gives us an image: clay mixed with divine blood, low material joined to dangerous inheritance, mortality carrying a spark from a world that does not die. Enki's presence at this moment is crucial, but not simple. He is not standing outside the system as a pure rescuer. He is part of the divine decision that brings humanity into a life of service. His wisdom helps solve the crisis of the gods. In that sense, he is implicated in the burden that defines human life. The aching labor of fields, temples, canals, and offerings is not an accident after creation. It is the reason for creation. And yet, because Enki understands the mechanism, he also understands the cost. That may be the beginning of his later sympathy. He knows what humans were made for. He knows the bargain hidden in their bodies. He knows that they are not guilty of existing, even if their existence will later irritate the gods. When other divine powers look upon humanity and see noise, overpopulation, and inconvenience, Enki can see the original design. These creatures were made because the gods needed them. To despise them for fulfilling life too vigorously is, in a sense, to forget why they were shaped at all. The myth does not say this in modern moral language. It does not need to. The structure speaks. Humans are made from clay, the substance of work and writing. They are mixed with divine matter, the substance of power and memory. They are created to bear burdens, yet their bodies contain the evidence of a divine crisis. Every human being becomes a walking compromise between necessity and mystery. There is another detail worth noticing. Creation here is not effortless. It requires craft. Materials must be gathered. A decision must be made. A divine body must be transformed into human life. The mother goddess must shape, form, and bring forth the new beings. This is not creation as a single command. It is creation as making. That fits Enki's world perfectly. He belongs to crafts, rituals, clever arrangements, and hidden sources. The first humans are not simply wished into existence. They are manufactured in a sacred sense, designed to answer a specific problem. The story treats creation almost like a technology. It has ingredients, process, purpose, and consequence. And like all powerful technologies, it escapes the intention of its makers. The gods wanted laborers. They received humanity. That difference is the space where all the later drama unfolds. If humans had remained silent instruments, there would be no need for Enki's protection. No flood warning. No anxious divine debate over human noise. No uneasy mercy. But humans become a presence. They fill the world with work and sound. They maintain the gods and they trouble them. They are necessary and irritating, sacred and disposable, beloved by one god and nearly destroyed by others. The clay remembers the earth. The blood remembers heaven. That is why this origin story is so much more than a dark explanation for why people work. It is a meditation on what humans are, made from below, marked from above, and trapped between the two. It does not flatter us with innocence. It does not grant us easy dignity. Instead, it gives us a more difficult gift, a beginning that explains both our smallness and our strangeness. In the end, the first humans of this tradition are not born into freedom. They are born into obligation. Their lives are tied to divine hunger, temple service, and the maintenance of a world they did not design. But hidden inside that burden is the element the gods cannot fully control. Something divine has entered clay. Something meant to serve can now suffer, remember, and call out. And once clay begins to call out, even the gods have to listen. Chapter 8. Enki, the protector of his own creation. Once humans exist, Enki's role begins to change. He is no longer only the clever architect called upon to solve a divine crisis. He is now bound to the consequences of that solution. The clay has opened its eyes. The new creatures have begun to work, breed, pray, complain, and fill the world with the messy evidence of life. What had been a divine answer to a labor problem becomes something far less manageable. A living population. This is where Enki becomes more than a creator. He becomes a protector. Not in the simple way a heroic figure protects the innocent from evil. Mesopotamian myth is rarely that clean. Enki protects humanity from within the same divine order that made humanity vulnerable in the first place. He does not always challenge the other gods openly. He does not abolish the hierarchy. He does not announce a new moral universe where humans stand equal with heaven. Instead, he watches the system he helped design begin to turn against its own creation, and he looks for openings. That is a very particular kind of mercy. The problem, as the myths frame it, is that humans succeed too well at being alive. They multiply. They build. They make noise. They disturb the gods not through wickedness in any grand theatrical sense, but through ordinary abundance. Life spreads, and the divine world becomes irritated by the sound of it. There is something almost painfully honest in that. The ancient storytellers did not imagine humanity as purely noble. They also did not imagine the gods as purely just. Human beings are troublesome, dependent, and loud. The gods are powerful, impatient, and capable of treating mortal life as an inconvenience. Between those two realities stands Enki, whose wisdom seems to include a memory the others prefer to ignore. Humans did not invite themselves into existence. They were made. They were made because the gods needed workers, offerings, maintenance, and relief. So when humans become burdensome, the complaint has a strange hypocrisy inside it. The divine order created a living solution, then resented the fact that life does not remain quiet, obedient, and perfectly contained. Enki understands this contradiction. Perhaps that is why his protection often feels less like sentimental love and more like responsibility. He does not defend humanity because humans are flawless. He defends them because they are his problem in the deepest possible sense. He knows the recipe. He knows the reason. He knows the cost. A creator who remembers the making cannot look at the made thing as if it appeared by accident. This makes Enki's compassion unusual. It is not the compassion of innocence. It is the compassion of involvement. A distant god might pity humans from above. Enki's pity is more uncomfortable. He is implicated. He helped bring these beings into a world where work, mortality, and divine dependence were already waiting for them. To protect them afterward is not to erase that origin. It is to acknowledge quietly that creation carries obligation. The other gods, in some traditions, respond to humanity's noise and growth with attempts to reduce the population. Plague, drought, famine, and finally flood appear not merely as natural disasters, but as divine responses to a human presence that has become too much. The details vary, and we have to treat these myths as layered literary and religious traditions rather than a single fixed doctrine. But the pattern is unmistakable. Humanity is repeatedly threatened, and Enki repeatedly finds a way to keep the fragile species from disappearing. He does this through intelligence, not force. That matters. Enki does not usually stride into the council and defeat the other gods by power. His gift is subtler and in some ways more dangerous. He knows how to communicate indirectly. He knows how to obey the surface of a command while undermining its outcome. He knows that words can travel through walls, dreams, rituals, and riddles. He does not break the world open. He finds the seam. In this, Enki becomes the patron of survival under authority. That idea would have resonated in a world where most people lived under powers greater than themselves. Kings, temples, floods, droughts, debts, officials, armies, and gods. Survival did not always come from heroic confrontation. Often it came from reading the room correctly, understanding the rule, and finding the narrow passage where life could continue. Enki's protection has that quality. It is strategic mercy. The most important thing to notice is that he protects humans without making them safe. That may sound like a failure, but it is part of the myth's realism. Enki does not free humanity from labor. He does not make humans immortal. He does not remove hunger, ritual duty, or dependence on divine powers. His interventions preserve life, but they do not transform the human condition into paradise. He saves the species, not the individual, from every sorrow. This is where the stories become more mature than a simple rescue tale. They recognize that preservation is not the same as liberation. To survive is still to remain inside the terms of existence. Enki's mercy keeps humanity in the world, but the world remains difficult. And perhaps that was the only mercy ancient people could imagine as believable. A God who removed all suffering would not have matched the landscape they knew. Fields still failed, children still died, cities still fell, kings still boasted and vanished, the rivers still gave and took. A mythology that promised total safety would have sounded false in a place where life depended on constant maintenance. But a God who sometimes intervened, who softened destruction, who preserved a remnant when the larger order became merciless, that was a different kind of hope. Less comforting, perhaps, but more durable. Enki's guardianship also reveals a strange emotional logic in the divine world. The gods may need humans, but need does not always produce tenderness. Sometimes dependence produces resentment. The beings who maintain the temples can become annoying to the gods those temples serve. The workers created to relieve divine labor can become too numerous for divine comfort. Humanity is necessary, yet not secure. Enki sees the danger of that arrangement. His protection is therefore not only affection, it is system maintenance at a higher level. If humanity vanishes, the divine economy loses the very creatures made to sustain it. But if humanity grows unchecked, the gods complain. Enki's task is to preserve balance between a mortal world that cannot help expanding and a divine world that cannot decide whether it loves or resents its servants. This is why he feels like a hidden architect even after creation. He continues adjusting the structure. He keeps life from being crushed by the powers that require it. He is not always gentle, and he is not always transparent, but he is attentive. There is something moving in that attentiveness. In the myths, humans do not have much leverage. They are small, noisy, temporary, and often guilty of nothing more dramatic than existing in numbers. Their prayers rise into a divine world where decisions may be made for reasons they cannot understand. Their survival depends on whether anyone among the gods remembers their vulnerability. Enki remembers. He remembers the clay. He remembers the purpose. He remembers that these creatures were not an accident cluttering the earth. They were called into being by divine need. And once called, they cannot simply be dismissed as a nuisance without exposing the cruelty of the system that made them. So Enki protects his own creation, not by denying what humans are, but by refusing to let the gods forget what they have done. That is the quiet power of his role. He is not the God who gives humanity an easy origin. He is the God who remains after the origin has become difficult. He stands near the hidden water, listening as the world above grows louder. And when the great powers decide that human life has become expendable, Enki begins to think. Chapter 9. The Flood Secret. The most famous act of Enki's protection begins with a secret. Not a loud rescue, not a battle among gods, not a shining command that opens the sky and declares humanity worthy of survival. The flood story, in its Mesopotamian forms, is quieter and more troubling than that. It begins with a decision made in the divine council, and with one God who knows the decision is too terrible to leave untouched. Humanity has become unbearable to the gods. The problem is often described through noise, but noise in these myths means more than simple sound. It is the pressure of population, activity, disorder, and mortal life crowding the divine world. Humans, created to relieve the gods of labor, have multiplied into a presence the gods can no longer ignore. Their usefulness has become irritation. Their very aliveness has become a disturbance. So the gods decide on destruction. In the flood traditions associated with figures such as Atrahasis and Ziusudra, The divine assembly moves toward an overwhelming solution. The world will be drowned. The details are not identical in every version, and some of the surviving texts are damaged or preserved through later copies and adaptations. But the moral shape of the story is clear enough. Humanity faces annihilation not because every individual has committed some carefully named crime, but because the gods have judged the human presence itself to be too much. That is what makes Enki's role so tense. He is part of the divine world. He knows its rules. In some traditions, he is constrained by oath or by the shared authority of the council. He cannot simply stand up and announce that he rejects the decision. Open defiance would fracture the order he is also sworn to maintain. Yet doing nothing would allow the creatures he helped bring into being to vanish beneath the waters. So Enki chooses a third path. He does not speak directly to the human hero in the most straightforward way. Instead, in the famous tradition of Atrahasis, he communicates through indirection, addressing a wall or reed structure so that the warning can be heard without being framed as a direct betrayal. It is one of the most remarkable moments in ancient myth, a god obeying the letter of restraint while quietly breaking its purpose. There is almost a legal mind at work here. Enki does not smash the divine decree. He punctures it. He finds the gap between speech and audience, between command and interpretation. He can say, in effect, that he did not openly warn the man. He spoke to the wall. The wall, inconveniently, had ears nearby. It is a mythic loophole, but not a cheap one. It reveals how seriously Mesopotamian stories took the power of words. Speech could bind, conceal, redirect, or rescue. A sentence aimed at one thing might save another. And so the warning passes. A boat must be built. Life must be preserved. The flood will come, and the human hero must prepare before the rest of the world understands what has been decided above them. The scene carries a terrible intimacy. One person, or one household, receives knowledge that almost everyone else lacks. Survival begins not with strength, but with being told in time. That detail is easy to romanticize, but it should unsettle us. Enki does not save everyone. The flood remains catastrophic. The myth does not offer a gentle vision of universal rescue. It gives us preservation by remnant. Humanity survives through secrecy, craft, obedience to warning, and the strange favor of a god who cannot or will not overturn the larger judgment entirely. This is mercy, but it is narrowed mercy. That narrowness is important. Ancient people knew that disaster often worked this way. A flood did not explain itself fairly before arriving. A disease did not spare people according to visible moral logic. A famine did not distribute suffering with perfect justice. Survival could feel arbitrary, dependent on timing, knowledge, location, and favor. The flood myth gives divine shape to that experience. The world can be nearly erased, and still someone may be hidden inside an ark of instruction. Enki's compassion, then, is not sentimental. It is strategic and partial. He preserves the future, not the whole present. He protects the continuity of life, even as countless lives are lost in the story's background. That is a hard kind of hope, and it feels very different from modern comfort. It does not say disaster will not come. It says that wisdom may leave a door open before the waters rise. The flood itself also reveals the limits of divine planning. The gods decide to destroy humanity, but once the destruction begins, the consequences disturb them. In some Mesopotamian versions, the gods themselves become frightened or distressed by the scale of what has been unleashed. After the flood, they are reminded of their dependence on human offerings. The creatures they tried to silence were also the ones who sustained divine life through ritual service. In trying to remove the irritation, the gods nearly removed the support beneath their own world. Enki seems to have understood this before the others did. Again, he is the god of foundations. He knows that what is noisy may also be necessary. He knows that the beings who trouble the gods are also bound into the maintenance of the cosmic order. To destroy humanity completely would not restore balance. It would create another emptiness, another hunger, another failure in the system. This is why the flood secret is more than an act of pity. It is an act of preservation at the deepest structural level. Enki saves human life because human life has become part of the world's design. However inconvenient, however loud, humanity can no longer be removed without damaging the divine order itself. And yet, he must save them secretly. That secrecy gives the story its lasting power. Enki's mercy is not public policy. It is not the official voice of heaven. It slips through a wall, through a dreamlike instruction, through a technical command to build. It survives in the narrow space between law and compassion. This is where Enki becomes one of mythology's great figures of uneasy conscience. He does not deny the authority of the gods. He does not pretend the council has no power. But he also refuses to let authority have the final word when the result would be absolute erasure. His wisdom becomes a shelter, not because it is pure, but because it is flexible enough to keep life moving. The flood myth also marks a change in the relationship between gods and humans. After survival, humanity is not simply restored to the old condition as though nothing happened. In some traditions, new limits are introduced: mortality, social controls, or measures that prevent human population and noise from overwhelming the gods again. The world after the flood is a managed world. Life continues, but under stricter terms. That too is very Mesopotamian. Rescue does not mean freedom from order. It means a revised arrangement with danger still written into it. So the secret Enki gives is not only how to survive a flood, it is the knowledge that divine order itself can be morally conflicted. The gods may command destruction, but a god may also pity what is condemned. A decree may be powerful, but it may still require interpretation, and somewhere beneath the official sentence, hidden like fresh water under dry ground, another current may be moving. Enki's warning preserves humanity, but it also exposes heaven. It shows that the divine council is not a perfect moral machine. It can become impatient. It can misjudge its own dependence. It can try to silence the very creatures it once needed. And when that happens, the future may depend on the one God clever enough to obey and betray at the same time. The flood secret is therefore not merely a story of survival. It is a story about the danger of decisions made far above those who must suffer them. It asks what mercy can do when law has already spoken, and whether wisdom is sometimes forced to disguise itself in order to remain wise. In the rising waters of Mesopotamian memory, Enki does not appear as a savior untouched by guilt. He appears as something more difficult, the god who helped make humanity vulnerable, and then could not bear to let it disappear. Chapter 10. The trickster who obeyed and betrayed. Enki's rebellion rarely looks like rebellion. That is what makes it so dangerous. He does not usually storm into the divine council with weapons raised. He does not tear down the laws of heaven or declare himself the moral judge of the other gods. His resistance is quieter, more intelligent, and harder to punish. He listens carefully to what has been forbidden. Then he asks what the words actually forbid. In the flood story, this becomes almost theatrical in its restraint. If Enki must not warn Atrahasis directly, then perhaps he can speak to a wall. If the man happens to hear what the wall has been told, then the command has been bent, not openly broken. The gods wanted silence. Enki gives them a technicality. It is a small gesture with enormous consequences. This is why calling Enki a trickster is useful, but only if we are careful with the word. In modern language, a trickster can sound like a comic figure, a prankster, someone who exists mainly to embarrass the powerful and amuse the audience. Enki is not that simple. His tricks are not random disruptions. They are interventions inside systems of authority. He uses cleverness when direct opposition would fail, or when open defiance would damage the very order he is trying to preserve. He is not chaos pretending to be wisdom. He is wisdom that has learned to move through constraint. That difference matters because Enki's world is not one where freedom is easy. The gods have ranks. Decrees carry weight. Oaths matter. Divine decisions are not casual opinions that can be ignored without cost. For Enki to preserve human life, he must operate inside a structure that limits him. His methods reveal the pressure of that structure. A god who could simply do whatever he wished would not need riddles, loopholes, or indirect speech. So every trick tells us something about his limits. It is tempting to make Enki into the hero of the story, the compassionate god who secretly protects humanity from the cruelty of the divine council. There is truth in that, but only part of the truth. He does protect. He does preserve. He does seem to understand human vulnerability better than other gods. Yet he also remains a member of the divine order. He benefits from it. He helps design its solutions. He does not free humanity from service. He keeps the system alive. That is the uncomfortable brilliance of his character. Enki obeys and betrays because he belongs to both sides of the problem. He understands why the gods need order, and he understands why life cannot survive if order becomes absolute. He is loyal to the cosmos, but not always to its harshest decisions. He is loyal to humanity, but not enough to make humans equal to gods. His mercy has boundaries. His disobedience has manners. This makes him feel strangely realistic. In actual human societies, many acts of protection do not happen through grand revolt. They happen through delay, interpretation, misplaced paperwork, quiet warnings, selective enforcement, and the merciful use of ambiguity. A rule remains in place, but someone with knowledge prevents it from becoming as cruel as it could be. Enki's myths give sacred form to that kind of action. They imagine a universe where survival may depend not on destroying authority, but on finding the hidden passage through it. Of course, this kind of cleverness is morally unstable. A loophole can save the innocent. It can also protect the guilty. Indirect speech can preserve life. It can also avoid responsibility. A trickster's power depends on the fact that words and rules are never as solid as rulers want them to be. Enki's intelligence is beautiful when it shelters humanity, but the same intelligence would be frightening in another cause. The myths seem to know this. They do not present him as a clean moral emblem. Enki can be generous, evasive, sensual, calculating, drunk, helpful, and manipulative. He can give civilization its powers, and he can lose them. He can shape humanity for labor, and then rescue humanity from destruction. He can be the source of order, and the one who quietly undermines order's most severe commands. That mixture is not a flaw in the storytelling. It is the point. Ancient Mesopotamian religion did not require its gods to be morally simple. Divine beings were powerful personalities embedded in cosmic functions, city traditions, ritual systems, and old stories that did not always fit neatly together. A god could be revered without being safe. A god could be wise without being transparent. Enki's contradictions are not mistakes to be solved. They are the texture of a figure who governs hidden waters and hidden knowledge. The hiddenness is crucial. A direct god can be judged directly. A storm destroys a field. A king gives an order. A warrior strikes. But Enki acts in currents. His influence often reaches the visible world through advice, dreams, ritual knowledge, altered wording, or a decision made before anyone else understands the danger. He is difficult to catch because he rarely stands exactly where the outcome appears. That is why he can preserve balance. Balance in these myths is not the same as peace. It is a tense arrangement between forces that do not fully trust one another. Gods need humans. Humans fear gods. Creation requires labor. Labor produces complaint. Complaint leads to punishment. Punishment threatens the system. And then Enki intervenes. He does not end the cycle. He keeps it from becoming fatal. There is a sadness in that. Enki's cleverness can save a remnant, but it cannot make existence innocent. It can soften a decree, but not erase mortality. It can preserve humanity, but not undo the fact that humanity was created to serve. His tricks are powerful because the world is dangerous. They are limited because the danger is built into the world itself. This is why Enki should not be reduced to either savior or deceiver. He is both, and more than both. He deceives in order to save. He saves without fully liberating. He obeys enough to remain inside the council, and betrays enough to keep the council from destroying what it needs. His morality is not clean, but it is active. It moves. It searches. It refuses the dead simplicity of absolute obedience. And perhaps that is why he feels so alive after thousands of years. Many mythic gods represent ideals: justice, kingship, fertility, war, sunlight, storm. Enki represents something harder to name. He represents intelligence under pressure. The mind that sees disaster coming and understands that shouting will not stop it. The patience to wait for the narrow opening. The courage, or perhaps the nerve, to use ambiguity as a shelter for life. In a world ruled only by force, Enki would be unnecessary. In a world ruled only by goodness, he would be unnecessary too. He belongs to the world as people actually experienced it, hierarchical, fragile, dependent on water and work, filled with obligations no one fully chose. So when Enki obeys and betrays, he is not merely playing games with divine law. He is revealing the law's weakness. A command can be powerful and still incomplete. A counsel can be authoritative and still wrong. A god can be loyal and still refuse. And sometimes, the future survives because someone wise enough to understand the rules is also brave enough not to let them have the final word. Chapter 11. Enki, Inanna, and the theft of civilization. Civilization, in Mesopotamian myth, was not something humans simply invented one clever afternoon. It was power. Not one power, but many. Kingship, priesthood, craft, music, truth, conflict, lovemaking, lamentation, judgment, weaving, weapons, ritual, and the strange social forces that turn a settlement into a city. These powers were called the Me, and they were imagined almost like sacred ordinances, the deep patterns that allowed culture to exist in recognizable form. They were not merely useful skills, they were divine charges, dangerous because whoever possessed them could shape the world, and Enki had them. That detail fits everything we have seen so far. The god of hidden waters is also the keeper of hidden structures. He does not only govern fertility in the biological sense, he governs the conditions that make organized life possible. A canal needs water, but a city needs more than canals. It needs law, desire, ritual, hierarchy, artistry, memory, mourning, celebration, and conflict managed just well enough that the whole thing does not tear itself apart. The Me are civilization understood as sacred machinery. Then Inanna arrives. Inanna is not a quiet visitor in Mesopotamian myth. She is forceful, radiant, ambitious, erotic, political, and difficult to contain. She is associated with love and war, with royal power and dangerous transformation. If Enki is depth, Inanna is intensity. If he moves through hidden channels, she often arrives like a bright blade in the room. Their meeting in the myth of the Me is not just a story about one deity receiving gifts from another. It is a story about power-changing hands. The basic outline is deceptively simple. Inanna comes to Enki at Eridu. There is feasting. Enki drinks. In a generous, perhaps careless state, he grants her the divine powers. Inanna accepts them, loads them onto her boat, and departs for Uruk. When Enki sobers and realizes what has happened, he sends forces to retrieve them. But Inanna is not easily stopped. She reaches her city, and the powers of civilization come with her. It can sound almost comic at first. A wise god drinks too much and loses the operating system of culture. But the comedy has teeth, because the myth is not only interested in whether Enki was tricked, it is interested in what civilization is, where it belongs, and whether sacred power can ever be securely guarded. Enki possesses the Me, but possession does not mean permanent control. Inanna receives them, perhaps through his flawed generosity, perhaps through her strategic brilliance, perhaps through some mixture of both. The myth leaves room for ambiguity, and that ambiguity is where the story becomes alive. Was Inanna stealing civilization or claiming what her city needed? Was Enki foolish, or was his drunkenness a mythic way to explain why power moved from one sacred center to another? The evidence does not allow us to turn this into a clean political report. We are dealing with mythic language, not minutes from a divine transaction. Yet the story likely reflects something real about how Mesopotamian cities imagined their religious status. Eridu, associated with Enki and old beginnings, held one kind of sacred prestige. Uruk, associated strongly with Inanna, became one of the great centers of urban life and royal ideology. A myth in which the powers of civilization travel from Enki's domain to Inanna's city is not random. It gives cosmic meaning to cultural transfer. It says, the city has its powers because the gods themselves moved them there. But notice how unsettling the powers are. The Me are not simply a basket of nice accomplishments. Civilization includes beauty, order, and craft, yes, but it also includes hierarchy, warfare, fear, deceit, sexuality, sorrow, and the institutions that make human life both richer and more trapped. Ancient Mesopotamian storytellers seem to have understood that culture is not innocent. The city offers music, abundance, identity, and skill. It also offers kings, armies, debts, status, punishment, and grief formalized into ritual. To receive civilization is to receive the whole package. That is why Enki's loss is not merely a humiliation. It is the release of forces that cannot be reduced to progress. The me do not make life simply better. They make life more human in the Mesopotamian sense. Organized, intense, dependent, beautiful, dangerous, and watched by gods. Once these powers arrive in Uruk, they become part of the human world's texture. People inherit not only craft and song, but also the conflicts that come with social complexity. Inanna's role matters here because she is one of the few figures powerful enough to take civilization out of Enki's deep keeping and make it blaze in the public world. Enki stores and understands. Inanna displays and activates. She does not merely hold sacred power like a locked treasury. She carries it into a city where it can be performed, contested, celebrated, and feared. This is a different kind of divinity from Enki's. He is the hidden source. She is the charged presence. He is the keeper of mechanisms. She is the one who forces mechanisms into history. Their encounter dramatizes a truth every city knows. The knowledge that makes civilization possible cannot remain forever underground. At some point, it must surface. It must be embodied in rulers, lovers, workers, singers, warriors, priests, and mourners. It must become social life. And once it does, no one fully controls it. That may be the most important insight in the myth. Enki can guard the me, but he cannot guarantee their stillness. Inanna can carry them away, but she cannot make them harmless. The city can receive them, but it cannot choose only the pleasant ones. Civilization arrives as a sacred inheritance with sharp edges. There is also a subtle reversal at work. Earlier, Enki's cleverness allowed him to protect humanity through indirect speech and loopholes. Here, he is the one outmaneuvered. The master of hidden knowledge becomes vulnerable to the ambition of another god. This does not make him less wise. It makes the myth more honest. Wisdom is not total control. Even the god who understands the deep structures of the world can be drawn into exchange, intoxication, generosity, regret. That is a surprisingly human portrait of a god. Enki's reaction after Inanna leaves is important because it shows that sacred gifts can become contested after they are given. He sends messengers to recover the me, as if the transfer can still be undone. But Inanna's progress toward Uruk has its own momentum. The boat moves, the powers travel. What has crossed from one domain to another cannot simply be called back by regret. This is how culture often works. A technique, a ritual, a song, an idea, a political form moves from one place to another, and once received, it becomes difficult to reclaim. Origin matters, but circulation matters too. The myth captures that movement in divine form. Civilization is guarded, granted, taken, resisted, and finally installed somewhere new. For humanity, the story deepens the mystery of Enki's gifts. He is not only involved in making humans, He is also tied to the powers that make human society complicated. He gives or loses the very forces that allow cities to become magnificent and unbearable, that makes him again both benefactor and source of trouble. Without the me, human life lacks the sacred structures of culture. With them, human life gains all the burdens of civilization. Inanna does not steal a paradise. She carries away a storm of order. And Enki, Lord of the Deep, watches as what was hidden enters the city. The powers leave the quiet authority of the Abzu and move toward streets, temples, songs, beds, thrones, workshops, disputes, and funeral laments. Civilization becomes visible. It becomes human. It becomes impossible to separate blessing from danger. That is the strange brilliance of this myth. It refuses to tell us that culture is either a fall from simplicity or a clean ascent toward greatness. It is both inheritance and theft, gift and seizure, sacred pattern and social risk. Enki's wisdom may hold the powers, but Inanna's hunger makes them move. And once the divine powers reach the city, humanity is no longer only the creature made from clay to carry labor. It becomes something more restless, the builder of worlds it can never fully control. Chapter 12. Father, Rival, and Hidden Architect. Enki is easiest to misunderstand when we isolate him. On his own, he can look like a familiar figure, the wise god, the helper, the secret protector of humankind. But Mesopotamian mythology rarely lets a god remain alone for long. Divine identity is relational. A god becomes clearer through conflict, alliance, rivalry, marriage, inheritance, insult, and exchange. Enki's meaning sharpens when we watch how he moves among the others. He is a father, but not always a comforting one. A rival, but not always an enemy. A helper, but not always harmless. And behind many stories, he is something like a hidden architect, the intelligence that quietly rearranges what louder powers have set in motion. His relationship with Enlil is one of the most important. Enlil often represents command, authority, and the force of divine order. He is the great power whose decisions can shape the fate of gods and humans alike. In many traditions, when the divine world acts as a council, Enlil's presence carries weight. He is not simply cruel, and it would be too easy to flatten him into the villain of Enki's story. Enlil's role is order, and order in Mesopotamian thought was not optional. Without it, fields fail, cities fracture, rituals lose coherence, and the world becomes unstable. But order can become severe. That is where Enki's contrast matters. If Enlil is the voice of command, Enki is often the mind of accommodation. Enlil's authority establishes boundaries. Enki looks for ways through them. Enlil may judge humanity as disruptive. Enki remembers that humanity was made for divine need. Their tension is not a simple battle between evil law and good mercy. It is a deeper argument about whether a living world can survive by command alone. Enki's answer seems to be no. Life to him requires flexibility. The canal must be maintained, but water must move. A rule may preserve order, but interpretation preserves life. This is why Enki's rivalry with Enlil feels structural rather than personal. They are not merely two gods disagreeing. They are two principles pressing against one another: authority and adaptation. Then there is Ninhursag, whose relationship with Enki opens another side of his character. In myths involving Ninhursag, Enki appears as a fertility figure, a generative presence tied to abundance, desire, and bodily consequence. These stories can be strange, even uncomfortable to modern ears, because divine sexuality in ancient myth does not always behave according to modern moral categories. The evidence belongs to a mythic world where fertility, land, kinship, and cosmic vitality are entangled. Still, even allowing for that difference, Enki is not presented as spotless. His generative power can be excessive. It can create disorder as well as life. That matters because it prevents us from turning him into a purely benevolent sage. Enki's creativity is not clean. Like water, it spreads. Like knowledge, it produces consequences beyond the first intention. In stories with Ninhursag, creation and illness, fertility and pain, desire and repair can become bound together. Enki may need healing from the very processes his own vitality has unleashed. The wise god is not above embodiment. He is caught in it. This gives his later protection of humanity a different texture. He does not protect life because he is detached from mess. He protects life because he is deeply involved in it. He knows generation from the inside, including its embarrassments, dangers, and after-effects. Ancient myth often gives dignity to this kind of contradiction. The sacred is not sterile. With Inanna, the relationship shifts again. Inanna is not his daughter in the simple emotional sense that modern storytelling might prefer, though divine genealogies can vary and overlap across traditions. What matters most in the myth of the me is that she confronts Enki as a younger, more aggressive power seeking possession of civilization's forces. She does not wait passively for culture to be assigned to her. She comes to Eridu, receives or takes what she wants, and carries it to Uruk. Enki's reaction is fascinating because it shows both authority and vulnerability. He has the powers. He hosts the feast. He gives, perhaps too freely. Then he regrets, pursues, and fails to reverse the transfer. The keeper of deep wisdom is outmaneuvered by a goddess of appetite, ambition, and public force. That failure does not reduce him. It reveals that wisdom is not ownership forever. Sacred power circulates. Cities rise. Old centers give way to new ones. Even the hidden architect cannot keep every design underground. Inanna brings Enki into history. Through her, the powers he holds become visible in civic life. Kingship, sexuality, conflict, craft, lament, music, and all the bright, dangerous forms of culture. Their encounter is not only a divine episode, it is a meditation on cultural movement. What begins in depth does not remain there. Civilization needs foundations, but it also needs performance. Finally, there is Ea. When Sumerian Enki becomes Akkadian and Babylonian Ea, the figure changes language, setting, and literary context, but the core remains recognizable. Ea is still wise, still associated with the deep waters, still linked with magic, craft, purification, creation, and protective cunning. In later Babylonian tradition, he continues to appear as the god who knows how to solve what other powers cannot, especially when divine decisions threaten to become catastrophic. But transformation across cultures is never only a name change. As Sumerian traditions were absorbed, translated, reworked, and preserved under Akkadian-speaking dynasties and later Babylonian systems, Enki's image entered a broader religious world. He could be fitted into new genealogies, new theological arrangements, new political imaginations. Some features sharpened, others softened, Yet he remained tied to the same deep pattern, hidden wisdom intervening inside dangerous order. That continuity is striking. Gods often change as empires change. Their titles expand, their myths are revised, their cities lose or gain prestige. But Enki, as Ea, keeps his essential function because that function answers a permanent problem. Every organized world needs intelligence that can work beneath command. Every hierarchy needs someone who understands what hierarchy ignores. Every creation story that burdens humanity needs a divine figure who remembers the burden was assigned. This is why Enki's relationships matter so much. With Enlil, he becomes the counterweight to severe authority. With Ninhursag, he becomes fertile, embodied, and morally complicated. With Inanna, he becomes the keeper who cannot fully contain what he holds. As Ea, he becomes proof that old Sumerian waters continued flowing beneath later Mesopotamian religion. He is never only one thing, and maybe that is the point. Enki survives in myth because he can occupy many positions without losing his depth. He can be father and rival, designer and repairer, giver and withholder, protector and participant in the system that makes protection necessary. He is not the clean answer to the human condition. He is the divine mind that keeps returning to the problem. Humanity, in his stories, is not saved by innocence. It is saved by relationship, by being remembered, by being useful, vulnerable, irritating, and strangely beloved. Enki's place among the gods shows that survival does not depend on one perfect act of mercy, but on a continual negotiation between powers that want different things from the world. Above, the councils may speak, but beneath them, Enki is still listening for the hidden current. Chapter 13. The Dark Side of Creation. There is a temptation, when following Enki through these myths, to make him gentler than the stories allow. He saves humanity from the flood. He bends divine law when law becomes merciless. He understands what the louder gods forget. These are the qualities that make him feel almost like a secret ally of humankind. A god with one ear turned toward the frightened creatures below. But that is only one side of him. The same Enki who protects humanity is also tied to the conditions that make humanity vulnerable. He is present near the beginning, when human beings are fashioned to relieve the gods of labor. He is connected to the wisdom that organizes civilization, but civilization brings hierarchy, obligation, conflict, and dependence. He gives, or guards, the powers that allow cities to flourish. Yet those same powers make life more complicated, more regulated, and more exposed to divine expectation. Creation, in Enki's world, is not a pure blessing. It is a bargain made before humans can consent. That may be the darkest insight in the Mesopotamian origin story. Humanity is not imagined first as free, innocent, or sovereign. Humans are made for a function. The clay body is designed to work. The divine element inside it gives depth, perhaps consciousness, perhaps a restless link to the gods. But it does not erase the original purpose. A creature can carry something divine and still be assigned to service. This is not an easy mythology. It does not flatter us. And maybe that is why it still feels honest. Human life often feels like a mixture of wonder and burden. We inherit bodies we did not choose, needs we cannot ignore, social structures already in motion, and obligations that begin before we understand them. The Mesopotamian myth gives that condition a sacred backstory. We are made from earth and divine remains, but also placed inside a system of work, worship, hunger, and mortality. We are meaningful, yet not entirely free, precious, yet useful, protected, yet never safe. Enki stands at the center of that contradiction. His compassion is real, but it does not undo his complicity. He is not an innocent rescuer arriving after the damage is done. He helped shape the world in which the damage has meaning. This makes him far more interesting than a simple, benevolent creator. A purely good God would be comforting. A purely cruel God would be easy to reject. Enki is neither. He is the maker who knows too much, the protector who arrived too late, the wise architect still repairing the consequences of his own design. There is a familiar discomfort in that. Creators do not always control what they create. A city meant to secure life can become a place of pressure and inequality. A ritual meant to connect humans and gods can become another obligation. Knowledge meant to protect can become a tool of power. Even water, Enki's oldest element, can nourish the field and then swallow it. The myths do not separate these things neatly. They let blessing and danger flow through the same channel. Enki's sexual and fertility aspects deepen the unease. In some traditions, his generative power is abundant, but not always restrained. These stories belong to ancient symbolic worlds very different from ours, and we should be careful before translating them into modern moral categories too quickly. Still, they show something important. Enki's creativity is excessive. It spills beyond order. It produces life, but also complication. Fertility is sacred, yet it is not tidy. Desire can generate worlds and wounds in the same movement. That makes Enki a god of life in its uncomfortable fullness. He is not a distant craftsman calmly shaping a perfect object. He is immersed in the messy processes of making: water, seed, clay, speech, ritual, appetite, error, repair. His world does not allow creation without residue. Something is always left behind. A problem solved in heaven becomes a burden on earth. A gift transferred to a city becomes conflict as well as culture. A warning saves a family, while a flood destroys nearly everything around them. This is why the question at the heart of Enki is not simply, did he love humanity? The harder question is, what kind of love can exist inside an exploitative order? Enki may care for humans, but he does not remove them from service to the gods. He may protect life, but he does not grant immortality. He may outwit destruction, but he does not make divine authority gentle. His mercy is powerful because it keeps humanity alive. It is troubling because it leaves humanity inside the system that made mercy necessary. That is not hypocrisy exactly. It is limitation. Even gods in Mesopotamian myth are often bound by structures larger than personal feeling. Councils, decrees, cosmic arrangements, older powers, ritual expectations. Enki's greatness lies in how he works within those limits. But limits remain limits. His cleverness opens passages. It does not remove the walls. So was humanity blessed or exploited? The most honest answer is both. The myths seem unwilling to choose one clean interpretation. Humans are made to work for the gods, which is exploitation in a sacred form. Yet they also contain divine substance, receive the powers of civilization, and are preserved when destruction threatens to erase them. They are lowly, but not meaningless. They are burdened, but not abandoned. Their origin is compromised, yet their survival matters enough for a god of wisdom to risk subtle disobedience. That tension may be the reason Enki's image survived so vividly. He embodies a truth older than philosophy. Creation is never morally simple once the created thing can suffer. To make life is to become responsible for it, even if the making began in necessity, desire, or convenience. Enki's later protection of humanity looks, in this light, almost like an acknowledgement. He cannot undo why humans were made, but he can refuse to let that purpose be the whole story. There is something quietly radical in that refusal. The divine council may see humans as labor, noise, population, and ritual service. Enki sees more, not because humans are pure, and not because the myths imagine them as masters of creation, but because he knows what went into them. Clay is not nothing. Divine blood is not nothing. Work is not nothing. The creatures made from all three cannot be dismissed without moral consequence. And this is where the darkness of creation becomes strangely luminous. Humanity's origin, in these myths, is not clean enough to comfort us. It is marked by exhaustion, sacrifice, obligation, and control. But precisely because it begins in compromise, every act of protection afterward matters more. Mercy is not easy in such a world. It has to be smuggled through rules, hidden in warnings, spoken to walls, carried like a secret through the machinery of power. Enki's shadow is therefore inseparable from his mercy. He helped make the human condition difficult. He also became the god most willing to preserve the beings trapped inside it. That does not absolve him. It deepens him, and it leaves us with a creator who is not pure light, but something more ancient and more unsettling. A mind beneath the waters, still watching the clay creatures struggle with the life he helped call forth. Chapter 14. From Sumer to Babylon. Enki did not disappear when Sumerian power faded. That may sound simple, but it is one of the most important facts about him. Cities rise, languages shift, dynasties replace one another, and old gods can lose their sharpness as the world that first named them changes. Yet Enki endured. He moved across languages. He entered new theological arrangements. He became known to Akkadian and Babylonian tradition as Ea. The name changed, but the deep water remained. That continuity tells us something about Mesopotamian religion. It was not a museum of fixed statues, each god locked forever in a single city and a single age. It was a living system shaped by conquest, translation, scribal learning, temple politics, and centuries of retelling. Older Sumerian traditions did not simply vanish when Akkadian-speaking peoples came to dominate much of Mesopotamia. They were absorbed, preserved, adapted, and sometimes reinterpreted through new cultural lenses. Enki's transformation into Ea belongs to that long process. He remained the wise god. He remained tied to the subterranean fresh water, the deep source beneath the world. He remained connected with magic, purification, craft, creation, and the protection of human life. In later stories, Ea often appears as the divine intelligence behind solutions that other gods cannot reach. When a plan is too severe, when a decree threatens the balance of existence, when the world needs cunning rather than force, Ea is the god who understands where the hidden passage lies. This is not a small survival. It is a theological achievement. Many gods can command loyalty in a single city. Fewer can travel across centuries without losing their essence. Enki could do this because his identity was built around ideas that outlived any one political order. Water beneath the land, wisdom beneath authority, technique beneath civilization, mercy beneath law. Empires could change the language of worship, but they could not easily outgrow the need for those things. Still, we should be cautious. It would be too neat to say that Sumerian Enki and Babylonian Ea are exactly the same figure under different labels. No god who travels through time remains untouched. The stories around him changed because the world around him changed. New gods rose in prominence. Older myths were fitted into larger systems. The religious imagination of Babylon was not simply Sumer wearing a new robe. It had its own priorities, its own politics, its own scribal traditions, but the resemblance is too strong to ignore. Ea continues to carry Enki's deep intelligence. He is still the god who knows, still the one associated with hidden waters and ritual power, still the figure whose wisdom can be compassionate, strategic, and dangerous. In the Babylonian world, where grand cosmic myths and royal ideologies became increasingly elaborate, Ea could function as the old intelligence beneath the newer architecture. That image matters. Old waters under new empires. Babylon, like the cities before it, depended on inheritance. Its culture did not emerge from nothing. It stood on layers of older Sumerian and Akkadian memory, just as temples stood on rebuilt foundations and scribes copied texts whose origins reached back into earlier worlds. To preserve a myth was not merely to remember it. It was to claim authority through antiquity. The older a sacred tradition seemed, the deeper its legitimacy could feel. Enki, or Ea, benefited from that depth. He came from beginnings, from Eridu, from the Abzu, from the old imagination of water, before visible abundance. As later Mesopotamian cultures arranged their divine worlds, that aura of antiquity made him valuable. He could be treated as a primordial intelligence, a god whose wisdom belonged not only to one city's cult, but to the structure of reality itself. And yet, as Babylonian religion developed, Ea's place was also shaped by the rise of other divine powers. In some later traditions, especially those centered on Babylon's great god Marduk, Ea appears in relation to a younger, more publicly triumphant divine authority. That relationship is important because it shows how an older god of wisdom could be repositioned without being erased. Ea may not always occupy the highest throne, but his knowledge remains essential. The hero may act, the kingly god may rule, but the wise father or counselor often knows the deeper method. This is a familiar pattern in myth. Power likes to stand in the center. Wisdom often remains slightly to the side, indispensable and not always celebrated. Ea's survival also reminds us that Mesopotamian religion was cumulative rather than cleanly replacing itself every few centuries. Myths were not discarded like outdated laws. They were reworked. Names were translated. Functions overlapped. Genealogies shifted. A Sumerian god could become part of an Akkadian-speaking world, then appear in Babylonian literature with both old and new meanings attached. That process leaves traces of tension. A story may preserve Sumerian materials while carrying later theological concerns. A god may retain older associations while serving a newer narrative. A myth may seem ancient in content but survive only through later copies. This does not make the tradition false. It makes it layered. And with Enki, those layers are especially appropriate. A god of depth should not have a flat history. What remained constant was the role he played when the universe needed intelligence rather than display. Ea was not merely knowledgeable, he was useful. He understood how to avert catastrophe, how to purify, how to advise, how to create, how to manage dangerous forces. His wisdom was still practical, still connected to the maintenance of life. In a region where kingship, temple ritual, agriculture, and cosmic order were imagined as deeply connected, such a god could never become irrelevant. This is why the shift from Enki to Ea should not be read only as linguistic change. It is also a story about cultural memory. The old Sumerian South continued to speak through later Mesopotamia, not always in the same voice, but with recognizable themes. The fresh water beneath the earth became a kind of religious memory beneath empire. Above ground, kings changed. Below, the Abzu remained. And perhaps this is the best way to understand Enki's journey into Babylonian tradition. He became Eo because traditions needed to keep him, even as they remade the world around him. His myths could be adapted because his meaning was not fragile. He stood for something every age in Mesopotamia could recognize. Civilization depends on hidden sources, and power without wisdom becomes dangerous. So as Sumerian foundations were covered by Akkadian and Babylonian layers, Enki did not vanish into the mud. He flowed underneath. His name changed, his relationships shifted, his stories entered new arrangements, but his deepest identity survived. He was still the god of the unseen reservoir, still the master of secret knowledge, still the one who knew that beneath every empire, however proud, there is a hidden current keeping the world alive. Chapter 15. Echoes in later myths. Stories do not stay where they are born. They travel with merchants, captives, scribes, priests, migrants, armies, and families. They cross rivers more easily than monuments do. They change language. They lose names. They gain new meanings. Sometimes they survive as recognizable memories. Sometimes they become only a shape in the background, a pattern that later generations may never know they inherited. Mesopotamia was one of the great landscapes of such movement. For thousands of years, its cities stood in contact with the wider Near East. Trade routes, imperial expansion, diplomacy, exile, and scribal education carried ideas beyond the places where they first took written form. This does not mean every later story can be traced neatly back to Sumer or Babylon. Influence is rarely that tidy. Myth is not a clay tablet stamped with a shipping label, but certain themes from Mesopotamian tradition proved remarkably durable. A flood sent by divine decision, a chosen survivor warned in advance, a boat carrying life through destruction, humans formed from earth, divine beings troubled by human behavior, and wisdom hidden inside the act of survival. These are not small echoes. The Mesopotamian flood story is the most obvious example, because its resemblance to later Near Eastern flood traditions is difficult to ignore. Long before many later versions were written in the forms now familiar to modern readers, Mesopotamian texts told of a catastrophic flood, a human figure warned by a god, instructions to build a vessel, preservation through overwhelming waters, and a new arrangement after survival. In Sumerian tradition, the survivor may be called Ziusudra. In Akkadian tradition, Atrahasis carries the weight of the story. In the later epic of Gilgamesh, the flood survivor appears as Utnapishtim. The names change. The memory persists. Still, careful interpretation matters here. Similarity is not the same as simple copying. The ancient Near East was a web of shared motifs, adapted traditions, and local theological concerns. A later flood story may resemble Mesopotamian versions because of direct literary influence, broader cultural inheritance, oral transmission, or some mixture of all three. The evidence cannot always tell us exactly which path a motif followed. What we can say with more confidence is that Mesopotamia preserved some of the earliest known written forms of these themes, and those forms became part of the region's deep mythic vocabulary. That distinction matters because overclaiming can flatten the story. It is tempting to say, this myth became that myth, as if religious imagination moved in a straight line. But myths are more like rivers in a marshland. They split, rejoin, disappear underground, and surface somewhere else under a different sky. A flood motif may retain its structure while changing its moral meaning. A creation image may keep the clay but alter the nature of the creator. A divine warning may remain, while the God who gives it is transformed beyond recognition. This is where Enki's shadow becomes especially interesting. In the Mesopotamian flood traditions, the saving knowledge comes through him, or through Ea, his Akkadian and Babylonian form. He is the one who finds a way around divine destruction. He does not simply approve humanity from above. He preserves humanity through cunning, secrecy, and a carefully managed breach in the divine plan. Later flood traditions may not preserve Enki's name, and we should not pretend that every compassionate or warning figure is secretly Enki in disguise. But the pattern he embodies, hidden wisdom intervening before catastrophe, remains one of the most powerful shapes in ancient storytelling. A world is judged, a remnant is warned. Life survives because knowledge reaches one human being in time. That pattern is haunting because it turns survival into a question of revelation. Disaster is not prevented. Most of the world is not spared. But someone receives instructions. Someone builds. Someone carries forward animals, family, seed, memory, or ritual continuity. The future depends on a message slipping through before the waters rise. Enki's world also echoes in creation themes. The image of humans shaped from clay or earth appears widely in ancient traditions, and it would be careless to claim that every such image comes from Mesopotamia alone. Earth is the most natural material for human beings to imagine themselves from. Bodies return to soil. Clay takes shape under hands. Farmers, potters, builders, and gravediggers all know that human life and earth are intimate. Yet Mesopotamian myth gives the clay image a particular darkness by mixing it with divine substance and connecting it to labor. Humans are not merely earth animated by divine kindness. They are fashioned to serve, marked by a dead god's element, and placed inside a cosmic economy. That combination gives the origin story its distinctive pressure. Later traditions may emphasize different meanings: divine breath, moral testing, covenant, disobedience, blessing, exile, or the dignity of being formed by God. Mesopotamian tradition, by contrast, keeps returning to work. The gods need relief. Humans are made to bear the burden. It is not a flattering origin, but it is a powerful one. It explains why life feels sacred and exhausting at the same time. This may be one of Mesopotamia's deepest contributions to humanity's old questions: the refusal to separate creation from obligation. The myths ask, in their own language, why humans exist in a world of labor, dependence, mortality, and divine expectation. They do not answer with simple comfort. They offer a compromised beginning. We are made, but made for use. We carry something divine, but remain mortal. We are protected, but not freed. We are necessary to the gods, yet vulnerable to their displeasure. Those tensions did not vanish when Mesopotamian cities fell. They continued to haunt later religious imagination in different forms. Why would a creator make beings who suffer? Why would divine powers judge the world they formed? Why does knowledge save some and endanger others? Why does civilization feel like both a gift and a trap? These questions are older than any single tradition, but Mesopotamian mythology gave them some of their earliest written bodies. That is the real echo. Not a single borrowed detail, not a secret code hidden unchanged across centuries. Rather, a set of durable mythic problems. Creation with a cost, wisdom with danger, divine mercy under constraint, humanity as both servant and beloved, destruction followed by a fragile renewal. Enki stands near the source of those problems. He is not the only source, and he should not be made larger than the evidence allows. Ancient cultures were creative, not merely derivative. Later traditions reshaped older material according to their own theology, ethics, language, and historical experience. But to read Mesopotamian myth is to sense how early and how deeply these questions were already being asked. The first cities did not only invent administration, writing, irrigation, and monumental religion. They also preserved some of humanity's oldest anxieties about being made. The people who lived among canals and temples looked at their laboring bodies and imagined that even the gods once needed workers. They looked at floodplains and imagined a world nearly drowned by divine decision. They looked at wisdom and suspected it might be both rescue and danger. That suspicion traveled well. It traveled because it was true enough to survive translation. Every later age has known that knowledge can save and corrupt. Every city has known that civilization brings beauty and burden together. Every religious imagination has had to confront the possibility that divine order may not always look merciful from below. So the echoes of Enki are not only found in a boat, or clay, or a flood survivor with a different name. They are found in the uneasy feeling beneath these stories, that humanity's relationship with the divine began in need, continued through danger, and survived because some hidden wisdom refused to let the end be absolute. Chapter 16. The God Who Chose Humanity. Enki's story ends where it began. Beneath the surface. Not in the sky where divine authority is easiest to imagine, not on a throne where power announces itself, but in the hidden water below the earth, the unseen source that makes fields green, bodies clean, cities possible, and myths difficult to forget. He is a strange creator to leave us with. Enki is not pure comfort. He does not give humanity an innocent beginning. He helps shape a species made for labor, bound to divine need, marked by mortality, and placed inside a world where survival depends on powers far above human control. If we are looking for a simple God of love, Enki resists us. If we are looking for a villain, he resists that too. That resistance is his meaning. He is the God who knows the system from the inside. He knows why humans were made. He knows what the gods demanded. He knows the cost hidden in clay, blood, canals, temples, offerings, and cities. And because he knows, he cannot pretend humanity is disposable. Again and again, When divine order threatens to become absolute, Enki introduces a complication, a warning, a loophole, a gift, a concealed current moving beneath the official decree. His mercy is uneasy because it is never detached from guilt. That may be why he feels so old and so human. The myths do not imagine creation as a clean act performed by a flawless being. They imagine it as a decision made under pressure, by gods with needs, within a cosmos already full of hierarchy and strain. Humanity is born from that pressure. We are not the center of the universe in these stories. We are the solution to a divine problem. And yet, once made, we matter. That is the quiet turn. The gods may have wanted workers, but they received beings who could suffer, remember, build, pray, and tell stories about why they existed at all. The clay did not remain silent. The divine element within it did not stay obediently hidden. Humanity became more than its function, and Enki seems to be the god who understood that most clearly. He chose humanity not by freeing it from every burden, but by refusing to let burden be its only truth. There is no easy salvation here. Enki does not erase death. He does not abolish labor. He does not make the gods harmless or civilization innocent. His gifts remain dangerous. His wisdom can disturb as much as it protects. His world is one where survival often comes through compromise rather than victory. But perhaps that is why the old stories still breathe. Ancient people living beside unpredictable rivers did not need a mythology that promised life would be simple. They knew better. They needed stories that could hold contradiction. Water as blessing and threat. Knowledge as rescue and risk. Civilization as achievement and trap. Creation as both gift and exploitation. Enki holds those contradictions without resolving them cheaply. He is the hidden architect and the quiet saboteur, the giver of wisdom and the keeper of secrets. The god who helped bring humanity into a difficult world, then worked to keep that world from closing over them entirely. In him, the ancient Mesopotamians imagined something more complex than perfection. They imagined responsibility after creation, and that may be the final insight his myths offer. To create life is not only to begin it, it is to remain answerable to it. Enki's greatness lies not in innocence, but in attention. He watches the vulnerable thing he helped make. He hears the noise that others call unbearable and recognizes it as life. He sees the clay creatures stumbling through work, hunger, ritual, desire, fear, and memory. And somehow, beneath all divine politics, he decides they should continue. So the god of the Absu remains below the story, like fresh water under dry ground. Not always visible, not always pure, but still moving. And in that hidden movement, humanity survives.